Welcome to How I Raised It, the podcast that goes behind the scenes with entrepreneurs who've raised capital. We uncover the tips, tricks, and techniques they use to get investors to write a check. Strap in and turn it up.
Hi, welcome to another episode of How I Raised It, produced by foundersuite.com. Today I have Jons staff of Getaway coming to us from Brooklyn. How's it going in Brooklyn today?
It's a beautiful day in Brooklyn. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good. Are you from Brooklyn? Did you move to Brooklyn from somewhere else? How'd you get to Brooklyn?
I grew up in a tiny town 5 hours north of Minneapolis, a little town of what was, when I was a kid, 54 people. It is now 29 people, sadly.
Oh.
But way up there where the Mississippi River actually flows north before it makes a hook and flows south. And so needless to say, relevant to what I do for a living, I grew up in the middle of the woods, in nature, on the lakes, around campfires, and eventually realized I missed that and created this business.
Interesting. We'll jump into it in a minute. I don't know if it's near you. As a teenager, I did a Boundary Waters canoe trip as part of Outward Bound, as part of my parents trying to get me to reform my mischievous ways. Is that near you, or it was beautiful?
A couple hours away, but unbelievable part of the world for sure.
I couldn't believe you could actually just take your, I hope it's still like this, take your ladle and just scoop out of the lake and drink straight from the water. So Getaway, what do you guys do?
So we design these tiny cabins. We stick them in the woods about 2 hours outside of major cities, and we rent them by the night to folks looking to disconnect and recharge. So there's no Wi-Fi, there's no television. Frankly, there's not that much to do around. We say to people, like, what we want you to do is nothing. We want you to be bored. If you don't want to do that, like, have a campfire, look for the stars, ask deep questions of your travel companions. But we've designed the whole product and experience around the idea that we're overconnected, we're overwhelmed, that cities are great, but you need to escape them. Technology is powerful, but you have to disconnect. And we hope you love your job, but you can't work all the time. And this is a special time and place to find respite from all of that.
Yeah, that's really interesting concept. So you mentioned your background a little bit. Where'd you come up with this idea? Was it just something you loved doing and you're like, hey, let's turn this into a business, or what? Or were you burnt out on a job and needed
kind of sort of both. So I've only done startups. I did startups before this, but in totally different spaces, in consumer products and technology. And woke up one day in my mid-20s, like a lot of us do, I guess, and said, okay, what do I really care about? And by that time in my life, I realized I love building stuff. I like starting things, but I wanted to figure out the company that I wanted to spend a decade or 2 or 3 of my life on. And to figure that out, I moved into an Airstream trailer. A friend of a friend let me have this thing. She said, as long as you have it backed by Burning Man, like, be my guest. So I picked that up in LA. I did it about 8,000 miles through the West. On that trip, discovered tiny houses, and the light bulb sort of went off. The first light bulb being, I want one of these. I want to stick it in the woods far enough away that I can, disconnect, but near enough that I can do so frequently. And for me, what I cared about was that, there was no Wi-Fi. It would be a sacred place where I didn't do work, and I didn't want anyone to bother me. And then the startup gene kicked in and said, maybe other people want that. This being almost 5 years ago when I started thinking about it, it was not obvious that people wanted to go to a cabin in the middle of nowhere and do nothing. Now that is becoming more clear that people want to do it. But it did start, originally from a seed inside my heart that wanted an experience like this.
It's interesting. This is a small sample size, but I just released one of these episodes with a woman named Isa Watson. It was a company called Get Squad, and it's doing like offline events for meeting people, right? Like kind of, getting offline, seems to be almost this trend of the counter startup, or I don't know, counter technology startup that's happening. It's, I guess, a trend maybe.
Yeah, throughout life, like I've noticed in all the weddings I've been invited to this year, unlike in years past, the invitations say, please put your cell phones away during the ceremony and the reception. they're making announcements to that effect. It just seems like throughout, I guess, society, culture, whatever you want to call it, we're trying to figure out how do we react to the craziness of the world. And, it's not, technology isn't the whole story. And I'm always careful to point out, like, here we are, like, using amazing technology to talk and to involve others in the conversation. So technology is great, but technology is a big part of the world, the way the world has changed. And in many ways, it feels almost cliche to talk about it. It's like, yeah, we've all, most of us have read the articles about, the Silicon Valley, like, CEOs are putting their kids in schools that don't have technology. And we've figured out that, like, this tech is really addictive and it does stuff to our brain that isn't so different than smoking cigarettes and all that kind of stuff. So that's a big part of how the world has changed, and we're talking about it to the extent that it almost feels passe or cliche. But the reality is it's only been like 15 years. Right? The iPhone didn't come out that long ago. And so to your point, we're all, I think, in this collective struggle of, like, okay, there's a lot of good here, and there's a lot of not good here. And how do we, have the good and limit the bad?
Yeah, it's interesting. So you guys, I'm looking at the site, you've got Atlanta, Boston, Dallas, looks like about 8 or 9 locations, or 2 hours away from 8 or 9 major locations. Is that how many you have around there?
Yeah, so we have 6 open today. We'll have 9 open by the end of the year.
And are you guys actually purchasing land and putting these cabins on there? Do you own the end-to-end chain, or is this kind of an Airbnb for tiny houses?
No, we own it. Sometimes that means we lease land. Sometimes that means we buy land. It just depends on the situation. But ultimately, unlike a lot of startups, we have a physical thing out there in the world in the form of land and cabins and all that sort of stuff that we control. And further view the product we provide as the moment you hear about us until the moment you get home from your getaway, and hopefully start thinking about coming back again. And it's really important to us that we control all of that, and therefore, among other things, are not a platform business, because we're so obsessive down to, how does the throw blanket lay across the bed, and what does the handwritten note card say when you arrive, and what welcome gift are we going to give you, and how do we, provide you the best possible customer support in a scenario where, the whole experience is about being alone or being with your loved ones in nature, but we want to make sure that we're right there for you if you need us. And so we obsess over all of that stuff, which in my view necessitates our ownership of the product.
And how remote are these things? Can I see any neighbors or other humans, or can I be as obnoxious as I need to be, or primal scream if I need to do primal scream out in
please don't, but you will. So you'll see, as you drive into Getaway, you'll see the other cabins, and then we work very hard to spread them out so everybody has their own private experience. So when you look out the window, you see trees. When you sit at your campfire, you don't see other people sitting at their campfire, in part because our thesis is about balance, right? And we talk about balancing city with nature, work with leisure, tech with disconnection, are the big 3. But like the fourth one is, again, everything on the left side of that, those dichotomies are good things, but we need the right side to stay in balance. And the fourth one I would add to the list is socializing, seeing and meeting new people. Great to do sometimes. Other times we want respite from that. So as we design these sites, we think about just allowing you to pull the ripcord and be alone with your thoughts, reading, writing, reflecting, or having a deep conversation with your partner, or connecting with your kids, and not having to think about, is my hair a mess? What am I going to talk to this person about? And so that's how we lay them out.
Interesting. Cool. How many cabins total? You mentioned 6 to 9 locations. How many cabins?
Yeah, we're at like 150 today and climbing.
And if you're able to, what's the average nightly fee, or what's the pricing?
Yeah, it's typically between 90 and 99 and 199 per night, depending on day of week and season and all that kind of stuff.
Cool. Very interesting. Cool business idea. I'll have to check it out. I have a younger sister who's kind of obsessed with both Airstreams and tiny houses, so she's gonna love this. Yeah. fun. Cool. So how much have you guys raised and over how many rounds?
So we did 2 rounds of seed, and then we did a Series A, and we just closed our Series B. The seed rounds totaled about 1.4 million. The Series A was 15 million, and the Series B was 22.5 million.
Let's pick them apart a little bit. On the seed round, did you have working prototypes, proof of concept, or was this just kind of your idea and were people banking? You mentioned you've done startups before. Do you have some exits? Were people kind of betting on you, or what was, break apart the seed round?
Yeah, the first seed round was, an idea and a pitch deck. That was $250,000. That, by the way, nobody should have invested, right? And it's incredible to me. Thank goodness they did. That allowed us to start this whole company and still be alive and kicking, 4.5 years later. But I say that because, we had nothing figured out about how to do this. And as background, I sort of mentioned I didn't come from this world. So I had no real estate experience, no hospitality experience, nobody on the team had those skill sets. We hadn't thought in any deep way about how to acquire real estate, how to get it through the approvals process. We hadn't thought about the scale economics of our product or our unit. I talk occasionally when I talk to other entrepreneurs about what I would call enabling delusion. And I really mean both of those words, because in that first seed round, I remember pitching with all my heart and energy that I was going to be able to build these cabins for $10,000. And I think at some point I said, I think I can build them for $5,000. In reality, the first cabins were like $40,000, $5,000. And I say that because if I would have known they were going to be $40,000, I would have never asked for anybody's money, because I would have concluded it's never going to work. They would have never given me their money. And so the enabling delusion is I so believed that they were going to be $10,000 that it got a little bit of investment in the door, and that allowed us to figure out that, well, actually they're like 30 to 40,000, and we figured out how to make the business work with that reality. And if we didn't have the belief of those initial investors who I owe a huge debt to, who knew some of that, right? I'm sure they had, they missed things on their own, I'm sure, but more often, I'm sure the case was they knew we didn't have any of this stuff figured out. And they did sort of make a bet on me, and that's a hugely, bold thing to do, and a thing I'm very fortunate to have happen to my life and for this company.
How do you find investors that would take a flyer on this? Because this is definitely an outlier idea. Were these just friends and family, or how did you identify a target list of investors?
No friends and family. None of my friends and family have any money. And I always, encourage, I just, depending on your situation, don't take money from anybody that you have to have Thanksgiving with is kind of my rule of thumb. And don't take money from anybody that isn't fully deeply aware that this money may never come back to them, or kind of my 2 rules, depending on your situation. So these were folks that were in my network, at least one of these initial 3 investors. And then, I did the classic thing that I would advise anybody to do, which is start meeting people as soon as you can, take every meeting. Don't get discouraged if somebody doesn't connect with the idea. There are a lot of people that don't connect with any given idea, and lots of famous stories about people that passed on the Airbnbs of the world and so forth. But there are a lot of people that, in our case, like the idea of going to nature and liked the tiny house, tiny cabin thing. And I found some of those folks, and we hit it off, and they wrote those checks, and, off to the races.
Yeah. Interesting. Cool. Let's go, I guess, to the next round then. Your next seed or Series A, whichever one. Who led that round? Was that a price venture round, or?
Yeah, let me talk about the second seed briefly, and then we can talk about that. The only interesting bit of pearl of my life experience from that round was there was a point when I started raising that capital that ended up being about $1.2 million, which at the time was huge money, and still is a big amount of money for people to bet on you. That fundraise started off pretty strong, got a couple of initial commitments. It was a sort of, a whole bunch of investors eventually that made up that round. And started off strong, and then I just like kept striking out with everybody. And I had a couple of meetings set up with two people. This was in Boston, who were known in Boston to be great advisors, mentors, investors. And I had intended to walk into those meetings and make my pitch and ask them to invest. And something caused me to pause. I think all the recent failures. And I said, you know what, I'm not going to ask these guys for money. I'm going to ask for their take on my situation. So I sat down, having never met them, sort of dejected, and just said, look, let me tell you about my business. Let me tell you about my fundraise. Here's all the things that are not working. Here's what I can't figure out. And really, without it being my intention, those two conversations, two different people, 2 days in a row that didn't know each other, said, I'm happy to give you advice, but please can I write you a check first? And that was $100,000, and then the next day $75,000, and that turned that fundraise around. And the lesson for me in that is just, these angel investors, institutional investors, whoever they are, like, these men and women get pitched businesses day in and day out. They are so used to being sold like, I've got everything figured out. I'm a genius. There's no questions here. And they see through it, right? They know and I use this advice on myself for my board meetings now, where it's like, it doesn't do me any good today to walk into a board meeting and say, everything's great. Because all that does is make my board members or investors in the other scenario start digging. What's this guy hiding? What's not working? And if you show up and say, here's what's not working, and here's what's working, and here's why I, with other things I could spend my time on, remain excited about this.
Yeah, interesting. That is interesting. I've heard this on this show a few times about, ask for money, you get advice, ask for advice, you get money. So you kind of employed some of those strategies. That's interesting. But it was set up as a pitch meeting, right? I mean, and then you go in and sort of tell them, I'm not actually going to pitch you, sort of? Is it framed like that, or are you just...
Yeah, but the key, I mean, these were entrepreneurs in residence, so it wasn't so explicit as a pitch meeting, which probably helped, but both with like the enabling delusion I talked about earlier, the $10,000 per cabin, and this ask advice thing, like that doesn't work if you're not truly delusional in the first case, or two, truly seeking advice, right? Like, I imagine most people would see through the, like, I'm asking for advice to get money thing. Whereas in this scenario that I'm describing, like, I was truly like, help me get this thing back on track with a level of, genuineness that I think wouldn't have been there if I was just trying to play the trick of, let me, pretend I'm asking for advice when I actually want money.
Yeah, totally. No, that's good. That's a really good point. How deep, not to get too deep in the woods, but how deep or how open kimono did you get? Because I can also see if you're really just exposing every pimple and wart about your business, that could just be scary, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I still think there's a difference between, being transparent and sharing the good and the bad, and being cynical or being pessimistic. There's a fine line there where it's like, no, there's a lot to be optimistic about, but here are the facts about the reality, and here's what we think about it. And, it depends on the situation, but sometimes the answer is like, this is a bad set of facts. And here's the 6 things where here's our hypothesis, and here are our alternative hypotheses, and here are the 6 experiments we're going to run to prove those hypotheses right or wrong, And there's some optimism in look, we're recognizing the problem and we're working to figure it out. That at its core, in many ways, is what raising money is about. Yes, in a perfect world, a perfect company, you raise money just to pour fuel on the fire to grow the company. But more often you're raising money to say, we've proved some things that we find encouraging, and there's still a bunch of things we don't know. And so please give us a few dollars and we're going to go try to prove this next set of things.
Were you I love that too. That's great. Were you extremely explicit about we're going to test 2 more markets, we're going to test a different design? Was it really explicit, or was it more just I guess how specific were you on these hypothesis scenarios?
Yeah, in this business, it's been about growth in terms of units within a market and then across markets. And so a lot of those for early, the first seed round funded a pilot of 3 cabins. And we really had no idea what would happen. And then we're very delighted, truly surprised when they sold out.
Yeah.
And by the way, that created all its own problems, as given that we had no idea what we were doing. And bless our early customers who would say nice things like, the cabin's so cute, we loved having the campfire. By the way, the electricity didn't work and the pipes were frozen and all this kind of stuff. But we were lucky with demand out of the gate. But given, we have a product that has very limited inventory by definition, I was able to tell a story about look, we launched, we sold out, people paid money for the product. And then we've been obsessive about feedback from the very beginning. And so we knew that people really liked the product. And then the immediate next question, be it, my own or the team's or an investor's, was, well, yeah, but that's 3 cabins. What happens when, and there was really a time when I was like, what happens if there's 7 cabins? And what happens if there's 12 cabins? And then we've now settled on this, sort of number of between 30 and 50 cabins per each city, at least initially, which gives us good scale economics and all that good stuff. But it went from, and then we had to prove that of what happens when you get to 40 cabins. And then of course, the first market was Boston, the second market was New York. So it was a series of mostly just proving that it would work and with greater numbers and in more locations. And knock on wood, so far, so good on that front.
Yeah, totally. Okay, let's go to Series A. Did you, I assume you had a couple locations, proof of concept, kind of get some numbers and metrics around what each location can do. And then how did you put together that round? Did you run a process? How did you identify the right investors for that? And it looks like Starwood, do they lead the round or they were involved?
The Series B, not the Series A. So the Series A was a little bit of a nut story, classic story. I'm sure you hear stuff like this all the time on the show, but came time, you see the cash balance ticking down, you see the size of the opportunity, you go, we've got to raise money. And so I wouldn't say I ran a process so formally, but you say, okay, I always think you need 6 months to raise money, no matter how long you think you need to raise money. So put together the pitch deck, created a target list, hit up everybody in my network for introductions. Probably didn't run it as tight timing-wise as I would now, but started meeting people and went on and generated some term sheets that it took longer than I wanted to, but the term sheet showed up that pretty much met the target deal. Mm-hmm. And the crazy thing happened that you hear about on shows like this, which is one seed investor of mine. I was excited, called him up, great guy, said, here's the term sheet. He said, we can do better than that. And he said, give me a day. He takes a day. He calls me on a Sunday. He says, you need to talk to these folks at Catterton, which is a big PE firm, consumer PE firm. And I said, I never thought about raising money from a private equity firm. The only thing I know about private equity is the guys I didn't like in business school worked at private equity firms.
Sure.
Because I was kind of raised in the venture capital sort of land. And he said, you got to talk to him. I talked that Sunday afternoon to one of the partners there. We hit it off, and they sent a term sheet on a Wednesday that was far and away better than what I had. And much more importantly, immediately struck me, and I'm not just saying this because you're recording, as great people mm-hmm. who have remained unbelievable partners, have shattered every stereotype I had of private equity. And so beyond the economic terms of that deal being better, the really, really super valuable thing that happened was I ended up with a partner who understood our business really, really well, which I would summarize as this is a firm that does nothing but consumer branded products and services and a lot of unit-based businesses. So, be that bars, restaurants, hospitality, whatever, things that exist in the physical world that, where you have an asset that you pay for and take care of, and people go there, and there's all the magic that happens in real life. And there's also the liabilities and costs of operating in real life. And that was not foreign to Catterton as much as it was to a lot of these VC firms who like the brand, like the market trends, like the, opportunity on paper, but just had nothing in their portfolios that looked anything like us.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard of L. Catterton before, but that's interesting. I'd think of PE firms kind of probably like yourself as the guys who come in, kind of the corporate raiders who take a public company private, slash costs and then spit it back out, or really financial driven guys, not so much company builders.
Yeah, this is, sorry to interrupt, but I had no idea of this distinction either between, bio PE and growth PE.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And this was a growth fund that invested in us.
But even growth PE, I just think of them as not necessarily company builders so much, or value add. I mean, I again, stereotype, not having a lot of experience with this, but I don't think of them as being super actively involved. Or is that a
Well, let me be careful not to make any blanket endorsements of private equity. God forbid I can't run for governor or something in the future.
Right.
Just kidding. But look, I don't know. I've worked with now two PE firms. I've had great experiences. They've been wonderful supporters. They have been deeply involved in the company in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
To the tune of I pick up the phone when I have a problem, which as a younger entrepreneur, it was we have to deal with these investors because that's the way we keep paying the bills. Whereas, maybe this is a lot of them, some of my own maturing. It's I've got a question, I've got a problem, I value their input. So, I pick up the phone and call. And quite frankly, I can't really imagine having built this business without having that sort of relationship, because when it works, it really works.
Yeah. Most PE firms, I'm actually a little surprised they came in at the Series A. Don't they usually look to do later stage B, C,
Yes. Yeah, this is another one of the reasons that PE was not on my radar. And, I can't speak for them, and I don't really know, but this particular firm was willing to take a bet on us, and perhaps that was due to some of their own strategy to go earlier stage. I think it also had a lot to do with our business hitting some of the key trends they were tracking long before they met us around, the wellness market, travel and hospitality market, the desire for people to disconnect. All were kind of things they were tracking, which, the, I guess, generic thing to take away from that is you get told no a lot as an entrepreneur. And so often that has nothing to do with your business or you. It has a lot to do with, I guess, what an investment firm would call their theses that they're tracking, or their own business model, and it's a matter of finding the right match for your business.
Totally, that's a good point to keep in mind. Very good. All right, well, let's go forward to the next round. Anything notable, interesting? Series B, did it just become kind of hey, we're executing, we're cranking away, let's pour more fuel in the fire at this point, or what?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, the dynamic that I guess is most prevalent in moving from A to B is it really does become about the numbers and the economics and the track record. The Series A occurred when we had 10 cabins, and I was pretty proud of us for having 10 cabins that were doing pretty well. But, in reality, I think probably those numbers didn't matter very much. And it was more a bet on, the team and the idea and the market and all that kind of stuff. Moving towards Series B, the numbers matter more. And so fortunately we've got, good metrics. And so that helped. But it was more dispassionate as a result, and more focused on, ultimately how quickly can you scale and those sorts of things.
Any change in how you put together target investor list or sourced investors for Series B?
Well, yes, intentions versus reality, I guess. But, as I sort of alluded to earlier, our business isn't a great fit for pure venture capital. And we're fortunate to have a number of great venture capitalists in our seed rounds, but small investments or as personal checks. And nonetheless, I found that most VCs are excited to meet with me on behalf of Getaway, and then time after time they kind of figure out this isn't going to be a good fit. They don't get the business, they don't ultimately like the business, or it just doesn't fit their model. And the unfortunate thing is that it usually takes at least one, but often 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings to get to that conclusion, which takes a lot of time. So I guess the direct answer to your question is I knew enough to broaden the target list to non-VC folks, but I didn't really have the discipline to not meet with them, because when they're reaching out to you or you're getting a good introduction and they're a famous firm, you go like, oh, this could be, would love to have that brand name on my cap table or whatever. But I could have saved myself a lot of time if I had better focused on the most likely firms to invest in the company.
And this was, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This one was led by Starwood, right? So that's a hotel group, and they have a venture arm. So kind of a strategic investor.
Actually, it's Starwood Capital. So it's Barry Sternlicht was the founder of Starwood Hotels, which has now been sold. And Starwood Capital is separate, and they're a real estate private equity firm that does a lot of hospitality, but also all sorts of other development, including residential and energy and so forth.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
So yeah.
And they do have some hotels, like the One Hotel and the Baccarat and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Interesting. Very good. Well, good. Anything we haven't covered, anything you would do differently if you could go back in time and give you're still pretty young, but your even younger self some advice about how you would do things differently? Is it just, screening investors and not wasting time, or what else? What have we not covered?
This is sort of Getaway specific advice, perhaps, but to the extent that you have people, listening and watching that have businesses anything like ours. Like our business is very asset light for a real estate company, and fairly asset heavy for a startup, Valley style company. And I say that because what I was less aware of at the beginning of this company that I wish I had been more aware of is that there are a lot of capital sources out there beyond venture capital that we have found over time are a good fit for our business. And had I thought more and more deeply about that sooner, it may have had some effects on how we raised money, when we raised money, in what capital structures, which, by the way, I didn't know what that meant when I started the company, we used to finance the business and our growth plan.
Let's touch on that just for a minute. You're, like you said, I thought that was a great way to frame it. You're asset heavy for a tech business, asset light for a real estate business, but you are asset heavier than most, tech startups. So how do you think about capital structure in that, given that reality?
The way I'd summarize it is, different investors and investment firms have different targeted returns, different investment theses. And so, venture capital broadly is out there looking to hit grand slams and make crazy returns, knowing that a bunch of them are going to be follow balls that that are zeros for them portfolio. There are lots of other investors that say, wait a minute, we will happily forego the idea for a grand slam just to get on base every time. Want to make sure we're hitting singles, and if we get a double, we're very happy. And so you can match that to the risk level of your business. So for us, that means, there are a lot of people out there that are happy to invest in land and get a, reasonable return for it. And if we're using venture capital to, buy land, that's very costly for us because we're, suffering a lot of dilution to buy an asset that somebody else would have been happy to take a much lower return for. And so that's what I mean when I think about capital structure is for our business, how do we divide, the financing of the asset from the financing of what we would call the operating company and the brand.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Very good. Okay, awesome. This is great. Well, if people want to learn more, it is Getaway.house, correct?
That's it.
And when are you expanding to San Francisco Bay Area?
Stay tuned. We're very excited to be in that market with all our SF friends.
Yeah, I'd love to check this out. I've got little kids, 5 and 8 year olds, and it's half the battle of just keeping them off the iPads and disconnecting, and it's a constant challenge. So this sounds really cool. Sounds like a fun weekend. So I'll be looking out for you guys.
Thank you.
All right, my friend. Thanks much, and good luck, and we'll keep an eye out for you. And good job. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Great to meet you.
Cheers. Bye.